Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another live session at the Reactor. My name is Rav. I'm the program manager here at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful, please be kind. Ask a lot of good questions. Obviously, please remember this event is for you, so do take this opportunity to ask good questions. The chat will be open, and we do encourage you all to participate. We have a very exciting session today on Excel and Copilot, and it is going to be led by Alan, who's an MVP. And with that, I'm going to add Alan now to the stage, and he will take this away. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Rev. Thank you. Okay, without further ado then, I'll just share my screen and we'll get this underway. I should warn you in advance, I've got a little bit of a cough, so I'll try and catch any coughs so it doesn't come down the mic, but I may fail on some. But getting into it, as Rev mentioned, my name's Alan. This is all about Copilot and for Excel. And a famous tagline you may see underneath there for fans of that show. As you know, the way is now AI in how we're going into this kind of AI era and how we work with data, whether that be Excel or especially other Microsoft products like Power BI, etc. The way we use them is changing, and coming to events like this to keep up to speed on that. Now, going through this briefly because we want to get to the exciting stuff, but this is just some bits about me. As Rav says, I'm an MVP, but more along my lines is that I'm a trainer. You know, I speak to businesses and train people in the use of Excel and other Microsoft products every day. Aims of this session, more importantly, you know, it's pretty action-packed. Hopefully we'll get through as much as we can. We only have, say 50 minutes once you trim bits off and handle questions. But first of all, to understand some of the impacts that Copilots are going to make and where they fit into this AI era. And then we're going to see some, typical kind of operations in Excel where Copilots at the moment can help. And obviously these things are changing fast. So this presentation today could probably be quite different in a year's time due to the rapid growth of change. But formulas is something that Copilots are quite possibly best at when it comes to Excel. It's probably their key area. So we'll see a few examples of that, both creating them, but also advising us and even helping to fix them. We'll see them perform some generic admin tasks, and then we'll look at them analyzing data, producing maybe pivot tables or pivot charts through some normal conversation, some natural language. Now, potentially, being that this is live, I always say that everything could go wrong. I have a plan here with a file and an agenda, but when you're speaking to AI, just like when you're speaking to anybody, I have no guarantees the response that comes back is the one that I'm expecting. I have a pretty solid idea, but it doesn't always go that way. And this is not my first live session where AI just doesn't play the game it does. This is just a bit of admin for this. So there is actually a link in the chat window for the Excel file that I'll be using for the session. That link you can see on screen is also that. So you could tap that into a browser. And I think it's going to be made available with the recording and stuff as well. So if you want to follow along or if you want to practice with stuff after, that URL, computergargoyle.com, Copilot for Excel.xlsx, which is also in the chat window, is the file I'll be using. And as Rev says, please ask questions. We'll do what we can in responding to them based on the time we have and stuff. And I have a rhino as my logo, so you generally see a few rhinos. This is a little quote from a certain individual you might recognise, just giving an idea of the adoption of Copilot. So that's quite a lot of text. I'm not going to read all that out. You can read a bit if you want, but it essentially, in summary, is just Satya saying how Copilot's been made available to more organisations, hitting that small business market as well. It's not just about big businesses as it becomes more what's what I'm looking for, but it becomes more available in terms of cost and accessibility. and it's been adopted by many companies now. So the growth appears to be good. And being that we are employees or maybe self-employed, but we operate in these markets, we deal with clients or we have employers who may have Copilot, we need to know it. Now, something that is often misunderstood or not realized is that there are actually different types of Copilot. So when people talk about Microsoft Copilot, there's not just one. There are different Copilots. And normally when people talk about Copilot, especially in relation to Excel and Office apps, they're probably referring to Copilot Pro. So that's the one, I guess, that Satya was referring to in the previous slide, in terms of making it more available to small businesses. Because if you did a quick Bing search on Copilot Pro, you'll see it's priced at around $20, just slightly less than that a month, which is much more affordable and very similar to similar pricing, whether that be ChatGPT pricing or Xbox games pricing, other subscriptions. There's also a Copilot for Microsoft 365. So users who have a 365 license, such as E3 or E5, have a flavor of Copilot embedded in there that you can find within Teams and SharePoint. And there's also a Copilot in Edge, which is available for everybody. That's just part of a kind of Bing search now, as the way things are going. So I'm hoping to do a couple of examples of that. So even if you don't have a Copilot Pro license, everybody has access to some kind of Copilot. And there's a lot we can do with ones that you can find in Edge as well. Sure, it's not integrated with Excel, but it's similar to the way we might use ChatGPT. Okay, I think I've got one more slide before we get going with some demos. But hopefully as we go through this presentation, there'll be good examples of this. But when it comes to effective prompting, you can do a search on Amazon and you'll see people trying to sell books on prompt engineering. And I guess there's a skill there, but it seems to be a bit exaggerated in my eyes. I think as long as you're clear and you're concise and you give it context, you generally get a decent answer. Just give Copilot, as it may be here, but give the tool the information it needs, and generally you get a decent response. You don't need to have some kind of degree in prompt engineering. A lot of it is common sense. Being that we're in a conversation, as many of you may have done outside of Copilot, like ChatGPT or something, we can also guide that conversation. So it's not a one shot only. If we ask it a prompt, we give it some chat and we don't get the response we need, but maybe it's close or they've misunderstood what we're trying to say, then we can give it that second prompt and gear that conversation either deeper down that path or completely change direction, which is great. It's not like the classic searches or just throwing it in there, it didn't work, let's try like a new one. So I've put in green at the bottom that speaking to your data is going to be a really big in-demand skill, I believe. We can see that taking shape now. Even in search engines like Google and Bing, the way we use them is slowly changing and things are different. And in tools like Copilot, we can literally have that conversation. It's not just like a keyword targeted thing now. It's very different, and adopting the skill of speaking to your data better than others will keep you ahead of the curve. It really is going to be a skill that if you can excel at that pretty quick, you're going to be at the forefront of being more productive. So on that note, let's get rid of that rubbish. I'm going to fire open the Copilot for Excel workbook that's hopefully been kind of shared and you saw on that slide from before. Awesome, I can see it's been shared because it's my friend for hours in there as well. And we'll go through some examples. Now, in this first example, I'm on a sheet called Formula Columns, and I've got a really simple range of data here that we're going to primarily start doing some formulas with. So just zooming that in a little bit. Now, I've got Copilot enabled here. This is Copilot within Excel, so Copilot Pro. It's available on both desktop and online versions of Excel. I'm going to do desktop for demonstrations today, but if you use Excel Online, kind of classic 365, it's available there too. On the Home tab, Copilot has chucked way over on the end of the Home tab. I can see it tucked over here near the add-ins and the Analyze Data button. And if I click on that Copilot now, it will open up this pane on the right. We can see it's still in a preview at the moment. And I can see a prompt at the bottom. Sorry, no, probably prompt is a bad use of the word there. But I can see a message hitting me straight away telling me that my autosave is turned off. So to use Copilot, you need autosave turned on, and you also need your data in a table. So at the moment, they've provided me a nice button to turn on autosave, which is handy. So, so if somebody doesn't know how to do that and it says you need it on, no worries, they've given you the button. You can just hit that button and they'll turn it on for you. And then here comes that second prompt where it's now telling me that my active cell, which is cell C9, is not in a table, and it tells me that you need a table. They even tell you how to do it, and they even provide you with a nice link which probably tells you all the juicy goodness about tables. So I'm going to follow their advice. They say insert table, so let me do that. Insert table, and I'll just pick up the speed here so we can get to Copilot, and I'll click OK, remove the style, and give it a lovely name like TBL Country Sales. So quickly making it a table there, not talking too much about that, but obviously questions are available. We want to get to the Copilot, but I wanted to cover and kind of prove, if you will, that it does need to be in a table and it does need autosave, and Copilot kind of, held my hand through that path. Now, so in the pane on the right, which tells me it is still in the preview mode, so don't necessarily expect too many wonders, but at the same time, hopefully there will be. But first and foremost, it tells us that it can create what they call formula columns. So it can write formulas that produce columns. And we're going to see a few examples of that. They can highlight data, i.e. conditional formatting. They can sort and filter. I wasn't planning on bothering with a demo of that today, but if you wanted to sort and filter, it can do. And it can also analyze data, so produce pivot tables and actually write formula tables as well. And then something it doesn't mention there, but I may be able to squeeze in a demo of, is use it like a search engine. You can just ask it a generic question like, how do I freeze panes for the top 3 rows? Or how do I put a strike through a font or something? In the same way that you may search online, you can just throw that into Copilot and it will give you kind of step-by-step instructions how to do that. So that's something else it can do, which it doesn't really state in its little front screen there. Now, starting with formulas, let's try and do a few examples here. In this little table that I've got now, you can see I've got a last year column and a this year column. And I guess a typical request might be, can we find out the percentage variance, the percentage change between those two columns? So let's start there. And over in the Copilot pane, I'm going to click right at the bottom where we have the prompt area, where it says that we can ask that question. They're giving us a few examples as well, like, do you want a suggestion for a formula column? I don't think I'll eat up the minutes with that, but we could do. There's a microphone where we could potentially tell it rather than type away. There's some good stuff. Let me, 2000 character limit here. Let me just type away here, and I'll say to create a formula column. So when I was speaking earlier about being concise and being clear, there's no confusion about what I'm asking here. I'm literally saying create a formula. I know exactly what I'm after here. So create a formula column to show the percentage, typos going on, change between last year and this year. Now notice that I'm intentionally using the names of my columns. That's not essential, but when we talk about writing effective prompts, to avoid any misunderstanding, I am quite literally giving it the exact name of the column in that table. So it knows exactly what I mean here when I use generic words like year. So, well, what year? They should know what column because they are what they are literally called in the table. So I'm expecting some reasonable success here. If I click the arrow to send this in, and hopefully Copilot will be nice and fast because we are live and I can't just trim a recording here like I can on YouTube and things. And I'll just talk while we wait. Hello everybody, by the way, in the chat. Cool. All right, here we go. So whenever you create a formula in Copilot, this is kind of what you can expect. You'll get a nice kind of description of what it's done. You'll get the formula, which often comes with a nice copy button, although there is a button further down to insert it. So, you know, normally would do that, but you could also just copy it and put it in a column of your choosing. We also get a preview of the results, which is super awesome. And we get the opportunity for an explanation. So this isn't just throwing a formula at you. This is giving you the explanation of how it works, why they've done this, and even a preview of the results. They're even going to insert it for you. So this is absolutely awesome. And if I do click on the arrow to show that explanation, they're going to break this down bit by bit in these bullet points. And look, first of all, we're going to find a difference between these two columns. Then we're going to look at dividing the result by the previous one. And then we're going to format it as a percentage for you as well. Oh, this sounds really, really good. Let me find that button to insert column. And if I click on insert column, it does exactly what you think it's going to do. It inserts that column. And looking at our Excel grid, we can see that the formula is added. So, you know, once that formula is there, you know, we've now got this automated response, just like we all love formulas for. And it's even done the formatting for you, which is not something a normal Excel formula does, is it? It doesn't do formatting for you. That's a job for us. So a little two-in-one, if you will, there. What we didn't do is ask it for a column name, so they've given us a bit of, you know, off-the-cuff one called percentage change, similar to what pivot tables do, where they just say sum of total. So just like pivot tables, we could just type over the top there. If I want to call it percentage variance or something, we can change all that. So the first example, we have a formula, absolutely no problem with Copilot, a typical mathematical operation. What else maybe we want to do in formulas? Now, if I click on my next sheet along, seeing some other typical examples of this, I've got a table already this time, and we've got a couple of text columns. I have a name column and a reference column, and then we have a date column. So the plan is to quickly see some examples of text and date operations. Now, if I click within this table, I can continue with the, you know, the same pane that I've got. So down the bottom, so it's not necessarily like ChatGPT where you click the button for a new prompt. I can just continue in this pane. What am I going to ask? For this name column, I'm going to say create a formula. So again, being nice and clear, to convert the name column to, I'm going to say proper case and remove any excess spaces. So the scenario here is that you can see in this first column that I've received these names and they're all in uppercase. And yes, they're very funny. And I know, because I know this data a bit, just like people generally do with their work, that there are a couple of erroneous spaces. One of them is on the end of crystal clear, and I'm sure I put another one in, but I can't remember where it is. And obviously I can't really see it. But there are some trailing spaces, which is a really common Excel issue that obviously a lot of many users don't know how to deal with. So over here, I'm going to ask Copilot to create a formula for this. To an extent, Jose. Hold on for a moment. So with this, we've got a formula. I won't go through, you know, the explanation that for each one, because we want to try and make the most effective use of our time. But notice the anatomy of the response is the same in respect that we've got the insert column, we've got a copy button, we we have an explanation, we have a preview of results, all this good stuff, and absolutely double check everything about this formula. Don't just trust what Copilot gives you. And of that note, don't just trust what colleagues and Google give you either. So it's not a stain on Copilot. This is something you should always do anyway, is double check work. Don't just trust what people say, and also don't just trust them. Investigate what they've done, make sure it's right, and when you're happy, then insert that column. And once again, we've got a bit of a bad name. I should remember to name the header in the next example, but we have now got these names in proper case with spaces removed, and that's what the trim function does for anybody who's new to that. And if I go to crystal clear, I don't know if you care that much or if you want to trust me, but there is a cheeky space on the end of the clear there, which is barely visible, but that's why I asked it to do that. Now, Copilot can also produce multiple formulas within one prompt. I don't know how massively useful that skill is, but it is possible. So the plan is to use reference as an example of that. So maybe I want all three elements from that reference column. I can see there's 2 slashes, 3 sections, and maybe I want all 3, similar to what text to columns might do if I was to ask it the same question, or the text split function, which in response to Jose's question would be a dynamic array formula. But the problem with that is that Copilot only works within tables, and we can't use our dynamic arrays in tables. Therefore, at the moment of speaking, it can't take that path. Now, hopefully one day it will. It can do some pretty effective formulas now, but I guess the fact that we're in a table is at the moment a constraint on that path. So what it's probably going to do is have to use some more old school formulas to get this done. But I'm going to ask it to create, no, let's not use that. Let's get a bit vague with this one. Let's say split the reference column by the slash. Let's just throw out some more generic text. Maybe not an award-winning prompt this time. I could have been better. I haven't asked it for a formula, although I have given it the column name, which really is some essential stuff. I mean, why not? Just give it the information it needs. Unless you're trying to test it, why play that game kind of thing? I'm giving it that context. Yeah, it's one of the bullet points. Be clear, be concise, give it context. Let it understand what you're talking about. And generally you get some decent responses. Not always, but generally. Oh yes. So this is kind of what I expected. They're not the prettiest formulas you're going to find, but it's produced 3 different columns. As I mentioned in response to the question in the chat and stuff, naturally text split would be a pretty clear choice there. If you know your formulas, that one would do it. But because we're in a table and that, it's decided to go for a left and find response for the first one. This craziness where it has to find the second slash and that for the second one, and then the third one is just off screen. But essentially, without going into detail on these due to time, it's created 3 different formulas. We have explanations for all of them. We've even got a preview at the bottom of the 3-column result and a single button that will insert all 3 of them. So if I do that, we've now got 3 columns out of a single prompt. So really the point there is to show a text operation and functions like left, mid, and find, some kind of formula gymnastics that some of you may have done before, not necessarily straightforward, especially the second one. A lot easier like nowadays with text before, text after generally. But it's got it done. If we know formulas quite well, we may take exception to some of their paths, but the fact that it's done it, and I guess a lot of this is more geared towards people who can't do this and maybe don't have the skills just to write a formula off their head super fast. If they need to look it up in a search engine, why don't you just ask Copilot and they'll do it for you? Pretty nasty headers, but let's not waste our time there. So for Another example here, and then we'll step the formulas up a bit and also see a troubleshooting one. I said I was going to do a date example. So I've got this date review, and this is actually a question, like, not that it matters much for this presentation, but I was literally asked this question earlier today in a training session I did this morning, where the client I was working with needed to calculate the date 1 year in the future to the current date they had. I won't go into the detail of who they were and why, but in this pretend interpretation of that, I'm pretending it's a review, maybe it's some kind of employee review or something, and maybe we do an annual review sometime next year. So I need to calculate a year in advance. So in that question box in the bottom right, my standard start is always to say create a formula. There's that cough I said. That's always my standard result. It tends to work out well. So say create a formula to add exactly 1 year to the date review date. So once again, I'm using the context, all the things that I mentioned. I'm being clear, create a formula, add exactly 1 year. I'm giving it the column name, date review. So especially if I had more than one date column, give it that context. I'm talking about this one. So if I send this in, I am expecting a good result, probably using a function called eDate, although there are other ways. So who knows what will come back. And it is an eDate response, which would be the logical one, with the usual stuff of the preview and so on. Oh, and I forgot to name the header. I keep meaning to do that in an example. But in the prompt, if I did say create a formula and name the column whatever, it would have named the column as well. Me keep forgetting, you might want to take my word for that, but I guess it's easy enough just to change a header, isn't it? It's no big stress. Just frustrating for me. 12 there indicating the months. The explanation will tell you exactly that as well, about what they've done and why, which is awesome. Insert that column, or if I did the copy, I guess I could name the column myself, couldn't I? But I'll just insert it for now. Oh, it's done a US format. Very frustrating. We could format that if we cared enough. I guess I should quickly format that just in case I end up using it. Just doing some custom formatting just to quickly convert that in case I use it. So far we've seen it create what they call formula columns. That's the kind of tagline in Copilot. It's called a formula column. And we've seen it do a mathematical operation, text operations, and a date operation. And we've also seen that it has the potential to create more than one column from a single prompt. Now, the next example I wanted to lead on to is that Copilot can also write formulas that reference external tables. And probably the most common reason to do that of all is going to be a lookup formula. Now, it's not the only one. Things like count ifs would be another big shout. But lookups, like your VLOOKUP and your XLOOKUP, is going to be the more common need. So in this example, I have a sheet called country data. And this country data sheet has a table on it, which is named TBL country data. So you see, I've got this table, it's called TBL country data, and it has a column called country and a column called code. Just bringing you up to speed on what we're dealing with at the moment. Now, on the first sheet that I started with, you may remember that I have some countries on here. So maybe I want the country code for each of those countries. And obviously this information is in a separate table on a separate sheet. And remember that table is called TBL country data. So getting into it here, I'm going to create a prompt. I'm going to ask it to create a formula to return the 3-digit country code from TBL country data for each country. So looking at my prompt here, the usual start that I like to do, but then from there, I'm asking it for a 3-digit country code. So, I've kind of mentioned the column name. You might remember the name was called code. That was the name of that column. But I'm also saying it in a more natural way. I want this 3-digit country code. I've given it the table name. That's pretty important. There's about 6 tables in this workbook for each country. That is the name of the header in this table. So sending this in, one would expect an XLOOKUP response here. Again, there are other ways, and let's not have an argument about lookup formulas live. But for people who know me, know I'm a bit of a index fan. But it does come up with an XLOOKUP response using that country column in TBL country data country, returning from TBL country data code. Results are in the preview, all the usual stuff. And obviously, if you've never done an XLOOKUP in your life or something like this, you can go and explore that explanation. Make sure it's what you need before you commit to it. You can't go blaming AI if things go wrong. And I'll insert this. And it's going to get a bit close to that other one now, isn't it? Let me insert another one. Can't have them touching like that. Awesome. And obviously with examples like this, the good thing is that we can validate those responses just for our own knowledge. You probably know the majority of those country codes off your head, whereas some of the other examples you may not mentally calculate in the same way. So we'll probably leave it on that on examples. I see it's halfway, I'm halfway through this time already. So we need to see other examples of Copilot. But in terms of formulas, that last one's showing that it can use data from an external table on a completely different sheet as well. So in respect to things like lookups and comparing lists and these kind of tasks, which are really common in Excel users, I get asked them almost every session I do. In some respect, it's some kind of comparison or duplicate search or lookup is such an everyday thing for Excel people. So Copilot doing it is really going to help the masses, which is what it's all about, Right. Now, hoping to see it help in a different way here. Talking about lookups, I do have a sheet called VLOOKUP problem. So what I've got here is I've got a VLOOKUP. So instead of X, I've gone for V here. And I've just got it searching on the table that we just came from, which was using a table. It's changed to a range because I deleted it for the start of this session. Let me just take that back to the table. Let me give you that table. Oh, that table's got more columns now. How frustrating. Let's not do that. That's going to ruin this. Right. But the point being that I've got this ref error. So I'm asking it to do a VLOOKUP for Nigeria in this range here, which was the table before it grew, and to return from column 5 with an exact match. And I'm getting this error, and I don't know why. I don't even know what it means. So we're going to ask Copilot. So this really is going into the territory that I mentioned at the start, where we can use it a little bit like a search engine, like a Bing search, but we can give it context. So in things like a search engine, like a classic search engine, traditional use of one, we don't really generally give it formulas, do we? We're probably going to ask a more generic question like, what does the ref error mean? Or what are common reasons to get a ref error with VLOOKUP? It's going to be more of a generic search. But with things like Copilot, we can really target down on the context of the situation. So I should be able to ask it a prompt like, I am using this VLOOKUP formula and I'm getting a #ref error. And I can provide it with the formula that I've just copied out of the formula bar. So it now knows the error that I'm getting. It is #ref. By the way, this data on the grid here is not a table. So I'm having to use Copilot here a bit like a search engine because I'm not in a table, so I can't use like a classic use of it. And here it's going to give me, and you see it's moaning about me not having a table right now. So obviously I can't use it in the way I have so far. I'm using it more like a search engine now in a general sense. And here you can see it's explaining. So the error F is in your VLOOKUP indicates that the column number is reference to column outside of the array. In your formula, you're looking for the 5th column. blah, 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 blah. But your thing is A-to-D, which is 4 columns. So the point of this demo, obviously, there's lots of formula problems we can play and try around with. But the fact that it's giving a response that is exactly specific to the problem I've got here, the fact that they're looking at the formula and they're saying, oh, your range is 4 columns wide. You're asking for number 5. You can't do that in a typical search unless you put it into a forum and get a human to answer you. You can't just go into Google and go, this is my kind of formula. Why am I getting it? And they're going to say, oh, it's 4 columns wide. That's not how we've typically done things in the past, but that's the way things are being done now. And using a search engine in the classic sense is very quickly becoming a bit of an old art, you know. And to be honest, for myself, I probably use things like ChatGPT for about 50% of my searches now. It's probably about half of my searches are now using that rather than the way I generally would in the past, because I can get a real exact response for what I'm after rather than just some generic blog post kind of thing, which is good. I own a blog, but so it's explaining the situation to me, and then hopefully I'd go and realise the error of my ways and maybe put 4 in here or something and get on to the point of that demo, but just to show that we can use it like a search engine. Now, whilst we're kind of in this talk, if I just jump back and just pop into a table so I can wake Copilot up a bit, I mentioned at the start that there are different Copilots. And I should have some open at the bottom here. If I can find one I want, like this one. I have a lot of things open. It's all very embarrassing. But if I bring this over, I've got a couple of browser tabs open here in Edge. You know, one of them being Copilot. So as well as using Copilot Pro within Excel, there are other types of Copilot. And this is me just using a browser or an app on my phone and going to copilot.microsoft.com. And the way that I just used it in that search engine within Excel, I could easily have done that just in a browser. You don't need a Copilot license to do that. You can just open up Edge and do that. That is not necessary. This is the way the searches are going. If you can talk about your data, if you can talk semantically and give context, that is going to be a real big skill in the way data works nowadays. So this is Copilot, and you can see a prompt at the bottom. But I've also got a tab open for Bing here, but you know, this could be any page. This could be a BBC page or something like that. The point being, where they're asking about a prompt here, is that also in the top right, when you're using Edge as your browser, you will probably also see links to things like Copilot in here. So I can see there's a little mention of it in the top right corner. And I can just open Copilot even outside of Excel and use it for these kind of searches. So for example, to pick a kind of generic Excel question, which is not unusual as well, I could ask something like, I can say, in Excel, so once again, giving it the context, I'm straight away saying, look, I'm using Excel. Don't think I'm using, you know, some other product that sounds similar. In Excel, how do I change a pivot table so that multiple fields are shown in separate columns and not a single column? So I don't know if you know the kind of issue I'm referring to here, for people who use pivot tables a lot, but it's a really common question, changing the layout. So I'm saying, look, I've got a pivot table, I've got multiple fields, but I need them, they're all in one column here, column A, let's say. I need them in, how do I get them in separate columns? I don't know how. And I don't know what words to use. I can't search on Google and say, how do I get lots of columns in pivot tables? So hopefully I can give a search like this into Copilot within Bing and maybe get a better response from them, which at the moment is not looking good because these answers are not what I want. It's come with 4 possible suggestions. It's just showing off, isn't it? Create a pivot table, add fields to rows. Oh, he's just telling me how to do a pivot table. Right, let me remember guiding the conversation from the PowerPoint deck. Don't just stop at one. We can now guide it. We're in a conversation here. So say, right, I mean that I have two fields in rows in a single column. I want two columns. Let's leave it there and see what it does. Come on, Copilot. Yeah, these are not good. No. It's still not doing what I want. Let's give it one more go. I want my two fields in rows side by side. Oh, very frustrating. Never mind, give me the same motion. You knew something would fail today. I'll come back on that question, which I can see. So you can see Copilot's given us some prompts here. I have tried this out and it did work in a couple of prompts. So unfortunately, these things happen when you go live. But just trying to ask these questions, using natural language, as they like to say. And as you can see, Copilot is trying to give me descriptions specific to my problem rather than a generic post explaining pivot tables. But unfortunately, this example right now, they are, at a glance, none of them are quite doing what I'm hoping for, which is for them to explain for me to use the report layout button on design. But never mind, I can't commit too much to that due to time. What I will do is just quickly jump back to Excel rather than using the Bing Copilot, but it gave us an excuse to see different types of Copilots that are out there. There is not just one. And thinking about other things that Copilot can help us do. I guess something that might be more to mention here is if I just scroll back up to the top of this Copilot, this isn't a problem, but if I just scroll back up to the top of Copilot, there is a button for chat history. And if I click on chat history, that's going to give me the opportunity to think about deleting history, which is a story for another day because that will take me to a browser and stuff. But there's also a button in the top right for a new chat. So I could click on new chat and that should, kind of clear what I've got there and give me a sort of clean slate. So it's not a problem. I could have carried on speaking in there. But sometimes it's nice just to clear that out and start afresh. So giving us an excuse to mention that. Now, picking up the speed a bit, because I'm a bit wary that it's approaching a 45-minute mark. Other things that Copilot said it can do is it can highlight data, i.e. conditional formatting, and it can also analyze data. So to try and squeeze in a couple of examples of that before we think about some questions, if I just ask a real simple one for highlighting, so I can see I've got this year values in this table. So I'm going to ask it to, what am I going to ask it to do? Turn the numbers in the this year column. Let's say turn the top five numbers in this year column green. So what I'm trying to do here is, I'm giving the conversation context. I'm giving it the column of this year and being quite precise. I'm giving it the color I want, not that specifically, but some kind of green. But at the same time, I'm trying to pretend that maybe I'm someone who doesn't know Excel that much. So I'm not using words like conditional formatting, because maybe I don't even know what that is. Maybe I just know I want to turn them green if they're in the top 5. So I'm just saying, like, turn the top 5, but at the same time, giving it a column. There's no excuse for not giving it things like that, really. That's not an Excel skill. That's just, thinking about the way you talk to people or talk to AI. So this is what it does in terms of highlighting, as they call it. And it says, yeah, sure, I can see your data is an A1 to F12. How weird is it that it wants a table, but then it talks like a range? They mention it's conditional formatting, and they tell you they're going to do a green color and a black font. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to hit the apply button. So they're telling you what they're doing, they're showing a preview of it, and then there's a nice button just to do it for you. So if I click on apply, that should turn the top 5 values in this year to that shade of green. And just to show that it is conditional formatting, if I pop up to conditional formatting, manage rules, there it is. So there's the rule they did. And obviously if we did have these skills, which we probably don't, otherwise we would have done it ourselves rather than Copilot with something like this, I'm sure. But here I can see where it's applied to and the rule they chose, and obviously edit things further if I could, or if I learnt those skills kind of post doing this. The cool thing is that within Copilot, and if I'm being honest, I doubt many people will take advantage of this. Yeah, you know what people are like. But the cool thing is that they are telling you what they're doing. So they are saying that I've done this conditional formatting rule. So hopefully if somebody didn't know stuff like that and Copilot's telling them what they're doing, that would be a kind of baton, if you will, for that person to go out of the way and start learning that stuff. You know, a lot of people probably won't, but I guess if you can just get a percentage and up their Excel skills, if we can have Copilot as not just an assistant to do things, but also an assistant to maybe educate, then that's surely going to be a positive overall. Okay, final things. It might just be a time for one more example. We'll see how we do. But I've got a couple of sheets at the bottom, one called orders, one called student scores. And the idea was to see some ways that Copilot could help us analyze this data. So for example, I can't remember what example I was going to do. I'm on this orders one. Oh, maybe I'll do a student score one. What was I going to do on here? Let's do a student score one. So in student scores, feel free to use your own questions in this data team. You've got the files. But here I've got 3 columns. There's 4 subjects in here. And I've got the same 40 students taking the 4 subjects. Yeah, so I've got 40 students taking 4 different subjects. It's already a table. So I'm going to quickly ask it this question. This may well be the last one unless we've time outside questions. But I'm going to say I need the top 5 student name. So once again, I'm really, I'm providing the column name. I probably don't need to here. I'm sure if I said students, they know what I mean. But I'm not going to be lazy. I'm going to say student name, so there's no confusion. I need the top 5 student name. For average score. So remember, they're taking all 4 subjects. So if you can take into account across all their subjects, what was their average, and then who are the top 5 students based on that. Crossing your fingers, it will do what it needs to do, and here it is. It's telling us that our top 5 are these people. And it's going to produce a pivot table by the looks of it off the back here. Yeah, it tells me it's a pivot table there. Sometimes it does produce a formula result or some other result. It's not always a pivot table, I've noticed with Copilot. So keep your eyes on that. Even an opportunity to copy this summary text, because you might want to stick that into a slide deck or something. But for me, I'm just going to keep the pivot table. Let me add the new sheet. This is going to do literally what it says and add a new sheet. And yes, it is a pivot table. So when I click on it, I'm in a pivot table. If we have these skills, I can now take this further and start producing charts or inserting slices and all that kind of fun. It's still good that it kind of maybe was quicker for me to ask potentially. But especially for people who don't have these kind of skills, doing something like that is probably something they don't know how to do. To create a pivot table, filter it for top 5, change the order, and switch the calculation to an average, because obviously the default would have been a sum, is beyond a lot of people's, probably 50% of Excel users wouldn't know how to do that. I would guesstimate. Whereas Copilot did it with a reasonably simple prompt. Let me see if I can get one more in there. Let's do one more. It's 10-2. Now I'm going to ask it to create a chart But in testing, it told me it couldn't do a chart, which is ridiculous because it can, but it wouldn't do it when asked. So I'm going to say create a column chart to show the count of scores that are 70 or more for each subject. So what I'm after here is some kind of sort of histogram, if you will. I want a column chart. I want it to count how many scores are 70 or more. So conditional stuff, how many people passed, how many are 70 or more for each subject. So for all 4 subjects, how many of the scores are 70 or more? Again, for a lot of people, this might be a typical question with this data, but something that's beyond their kind of wheelhouse. But with a reasonably simple prompt, this is what I said, like create a column chart and they give you a table. They're like, I can't create a chart, which is an absolute downright lie because it creates loads of charts. But for whatever reason, it can do it here. We'd have to take this further ourselves. But the cool thing is it has done it. I know from doing this previous that they are the right answers, but always check. And we can add that to a new sheet. So squeezing in a couple of quick examples there of Copilot from a natural language question, being able to interrogate that simple data set and produce typical reports like top 5 students by average score and a kind of frequency, if you will, like a histogram, how many of the scores passed across all subjects. And they had absolutely no problem doing it, super fast as well, which is helpful when you're tight on the time. So I guess it's just gone past 10 to 6 by my local time, which means I've been talking for about 50 minutes. So really you should take this opportunity to think about diving into questions, I think. That's the plan.
Yes, thanks, Alan. We have a couple of questions. So if we start from the top, Jose asks, what about dynamics array formulas in Copilot?
Yes, I'm hoping that kind of stuff will happen. But I think the limitation at the moment will be because our data has to be in a table, because we can't write dynamic array formulas within tables, just as a natural Excel thing, we can't do that. We get a spill error. That is the key constraint there. I think if Copilot can be made available outside of tables, I'm sure that will definitely be a thing. But at the moment, the answers are no.
Okay, the second question is from Harding. When Copilot creates columns for you, do these columns automatically become part of your original table? Is there a command to see the columns and rows that are part of the expanded table?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the formulas they create are added to your original table. They're just added on the end. They're appended to the end, the right-hand side. Yeah, and you can just go and view them in the formula bar and change them. They're all yours once the prompt is done. Copilot puts its tools down, and if you want to change them, you can. If you want to see them, delete them, it's all up to you.
Then another one. I'm sorry, but I don't have access to the table that you mentioned. I can only work with the active table. Could you advise on that issue?
Yeah, so the TBL country data table, hopefully you can't hear much background noise. There is a window open here, but it cannot be gone in a second. But the TBL country data table is on this country data sheet. So the sheet's called country data, and it's sitting here. It should be in the file. But when I did the example, I did actually go from the table that is being mentioned in the prompt. So don't worry about necessarily seeing that unless you're interested. You can go from the origin table, which is the country sales, as the question states, and we can put our prompts from here. You know, Copilot will find it for you. You don't need to tell it. I mean, you need to give it its name, ideally, but you don't need to select it or anything.
Then we have a couple of questions from Chris. Does Copilot enable one to work with a team where local or remote team members can work together, sort of like in Google Workspace?
I'm not entirely sure where the question's going, but I'm going to say that the answer is pretty much a yes, because although we're talking about Copilot within Excel here, Copilot in its different flavors is available in the likes of OneDrive and Teams and Outlook. So it is very much a collaborative thing. So I don't know the specifics on how remote or local team members are to work together, but generally speaking, yes, it's available in shared spaces, like OneDrive, for example, and Teams. So I guess overall, the answer is that yes, it is available. I guess it depends on the specifics of the question.
So, next question. Do you have use cases for omni-channel marketing data, especially on incorporating social media?
I don't know what omni-channel means. But no, I don't know if examples of marketing data. I'll have to ask Copilot what omni-channel means. Yeah, so sorry, I don't know more on the question to answer, but in terms of you using data, I mean, Copilot can use any data. I mean, it will understand it. At the end of the day, text is text, numbers are numbers, booleans are booleans. Everything else is context. Whether we're talking marketing, whether we're talking finance, the computer doesn't care. It's a number's a number. I guess overall the answer is yes.
Then, as an expert mentioned, she used ChatGPT to directly analyze Excel data. Is that
Yes.
possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. ChatGPT have in ChatGPT 4.0, you can upload Excel files and CSV files and stuff to it and ask it to analyze the data. Yeah. I've done examples of that myself. Obviously, this session's about like Copilot here, but without kind of shameless plugins, you can see examples of that on my YouTube and stuff, where I upload an Excel file and ask it questions, and ChatGPT just produces tables, produces charts from that upload. So yeah, it's not integrated in Excel like Copilot. It's not going to pull it on the sheet like Copilot, and the chart is not a pivot chart like Copilot can, but it is analysis. So it's not Excel analysis, but it is analysis. It doesn't do it on Excel. It can produce an Excel file, but it can't change an Excel file.
We'll take one last question. So the model is run in the cloud. How is the data being handled?
That's probably a question beyond my wheelhouse of expertise, but yes, it has been handled in the cloud. And it'd probably be a case of referring you to a standard Microsoft page if you want to read about, statements on how they're handling that data. I can't really go into specifics of the knowledge on that there. But yeah, it's all been handled, depending on the server you're using, on-prem or on theirs. But yeah, not much more to say on that.
Perfect. Thanks, Alan. I'll actually find a link to data privacy and responsible AI on Microsoft and add it to the chats. It's no problem. So to answer the last question, I will add it to the chats, like a link. But yeah, I think that's all the questions we have today. Is there anything else you wanted to say to the attendees, or you're happy to wrap up the session?
Yeah, I mean, I won't spend the time talking about myself because I don't like to. My normal thing I finish on saying is normally just encouraging people, especially with topics like this, to, as much as you can, like, embrace the change. The fact that people have come here and live as well, for those watching it live, shows a good attitude to this. But things are changing fast, and like I started this presentation with, the way we speak to data and that, and if you can get on things like Copilot and this stuff early, you'll be in the 1%, and you'll be ahead of that curve and ahead of the game when we talk about our peers in terms of Excel skills. So kudos to that, and don't stop, explore, learn, play. That's my closing statement.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Alan. It was indeed a very, very insightful session. So I definitely learned quite a bit from it. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thank you to all the attendees. The resources will be sent via email, and it'll also be dropped in the video. And yeah, thanks again, Alan. And hopefully we'll see you again.
Yes, we'll do. Thanks, Rav. Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.